The Shadow People by Reddit user World of Leo. For a while now, I've been hearing about a phenomenon known as Shadow People. These are ghost or visual illusions, I guess, where figures appear to move around rooms, houses, blacken their appearance, of course, causing fear and paranoia. Perhaps it's when you're sitting at home late at night with the lights dim, you look at the corner and notice something moving, something unnatural. You see the outline of a figure, some kind of shape moving across the walls. Or it's something much more sinister. It's not just a phantom spirit harmlessly dancing around when the lighting is good for reflection. Instead, these creatures are insidious and evil. They plot games to torment you, to trick you, to harm you. The shadow figures appear in your bedroom at night, watching, listening, sometimes even speaking. They cause doors to open and items to break. They creak your floors and cause chills down your spine. I've heard all of this and more, and I didn't know what to believe. This, of course, was until I saw them, and now I'm a believer. I live in an older house. Naturally, it seems this is where most of our haunting interactions take place. Maybe you believe in ghosts. Some say ghosts are spirits left behind. They are poor souls wandering the earth looking for something, anything to take hold of. I've never had much luck when it comes to ghosts. Possibly for me, I just wonder about the purpose of these creatures. Why would a spirit wander the earth, caught in limbo between this world and the next? The whole idea of ghosts just doesn't make much sense to me. And then there are those who discredit ghosts. Though spirits aren't just departed souls left behind. No, they are something more malignant. There are no ghosts, only demons. Demons, by definition, are fallen angels. They are wretched, otherworldly creatures who prey upon the souls of the living. Their main purpose is to maim, hurt, torture, possess, and kill. Over the years, there have been a lot written about demons, especially with the evidence we have collected concerning exorcisms in the church and psychoanalysis. Anyway, I mention all this because recently I've come into contact with some shadow people, and I'm not sure my recognition of them is good. Like most paranormal things, usually you're safer when you don't know they exist. I've made the mistake to admit the knowledge of them. It all started a few weeks ago. At first it was nothing major, really. Just a few bumps in the night and what I believed were my eyes playing tricks on me. I woke suddenly after a deep sleep to a low but constant thump coming from my living room. So I got up carefully and walked down my hallway. I peered into the room and saw splotches of darkness bouncing around. I made the mistake of raising my voice, and I shouted, "Who's there?" Everything went quiet, and that's when I saw the figure. The shadow person. It was a long silhouette, like a tall, slender man, and stood still by the door. I just looked at it, and I believed it looked at me. For a few solid seconds, I just stared the creature down, and it didn't move. Then I ran towards it. I don't know what I was thinking other than maybe I could overpower the thing. I stepped back, and I saw its full profile. My heart sank. The shadow person was tall and massive, bigger than I imagined. It sidestepped me and then disappeared. I turned on the lights and scoured the house, hoping to find it again, hoping that my attempts might cause a renaissance apparition, but I was not so lucky. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, I've had numerous encounters with this shadow figure. I've seen it lurking behind me while I watch TV. I've noticed a dark splotch hovering closely when I do my writing on my computer. Hell, there must have even been times when I've gone out into my garage and I thought I saw it by the car, like it was beckoning me to get inside. But probably the strangest part of this phenomenon is that the shadows follow me outside of my house. I've read quite a bit about shadow people popping up in your house constantly, but very little about them following you. For example, the other day I was in my church. I volunteer there on the weekends and usually help when they host late night events of different sorts. Anyway, I was there late at night, cleaning up in our sanctuary. It was just me. Everyone else had gone home for the night. I was supposed to put away a few chairs and then turn the lights off. Our sanctuary is like most older churches. It's an A-frame with massive pillars and a ton of space. I finished my job and proceeded to turn off the lights, and that's when I saw it. Lined up on the far wall were shadow people, not just the one that had been trailing me for days. It was an army of them. My heart sank as I saw hands and arms and faces protruding all over the wall. In an instant, I was surrounded by them. Chills ran through my body. It felt like tiny icicles were collapsing around throats and wrists. Everything in me went numb. I shouted and ran, but they chased after me. I started hearing voices too, coarse, scratchy, throat-like incantations that were swirling around me. I could only make a few words here and there, but the most consistent phrase I could detect was them saying, "Time's up, time's up." I don't know what I did to gather this kind of attention, but it's really starting to freak me out. Everywhere I go now, I see remnants of the shadow people. They're on the streets that I walk my dog down. They appear at work now, dancing across the walls. I'm feeling their presence more than ever before, and I awake oftentimes at night and see several of them hovering over me. And the whispers, they keep growing more consistent and louder. I feel like I'm losing my mind, and I need help. Please, if anyone has any advice at all, please let me know. My Best Friend and I's Experience with a Shadow Person by Reddit user Deep Space Dylan. I know this is nothing compared to the other stories on here, but I felt like I should tell it anyways. When I was about 7, I lived in these apartments and had a best friend who was probably 12 at the time, who I constantly visited. Now, first of all, I should say that the apartments always had these weird vibes about them. The kind of vibe that made you want to run home at night instead of simply walk. One morning I woke up kinda early and decided to head over to my best friend's house. My parents, although I was young, trusted me enough to let me wander around the neighborhood. I knocked on my friend's door and immediately Jazzy answered. Jazzy is my best friend, Nicole, stepdad. He let me in saying that Nicole was asleep and I was welcome to go wake her up. Of course, 7-year-old me decided that that would be the best option, so I walked into her room and climbed up onto the top bunk where she was sleeping. At the time, it was just me and her in the room. Her brother Connor, who typically occupied the bottom bunk, was already awake and eating breakfast. I started to shake Nicole awake, and she woke up after a bit despite being a heavy sleeper. We started chatting and making small talk while she fully regained consciousness. As we were talking, someone walked into the room. We both immediately turned towards the door. Now, Nicole lived with a lot of people, but none of which really met the physical description of who walked in. The quote-unquote person who walked in was just someone we both saw out of the corner of our eyes. They appeared more shadow than person, although I still remember that they were very tall, taller than everyone that lived in the house. They were tall enough that we could easily see them come in even though we were on the top bunk. Immediately, we both thought it was Jazzy and called for him. Once we got no response, we were both obviously confused and thought it might be Connor. No response. At that point, we were both freaked out, so we climbed down the ladder to look for whoever came in. Bottom bunk? No one. Closet? No one. We even checked under the bed, seeing if this was some sort of prank or whatever. It wasn't, and then Nicole told me something at the time. I didn't really know what it meant, so I just brushed it off. She told me that it was weird that we saw something, as they had already saged the house. It wasn't until years later that I found out that you sage a place to keep evil spirits out. The fact that the place had already been saged always struck me as odd because why sage a place unless something had already happened? We ended up practically interrogating her family to see if anyone had come in or even walked by. It just so happens that Nicole's mom and older brother were at work, and it couldn't have been Connor and Jazzy because they were eating breakfast and watching TV. To us, it seemed like something out of a short horror story that we would read together. Honestly, If it had just been me who experienced that, I would have just played it off as my imagination. But experiencing it with someone else, and someone who at the time was equally, if not more spooked, made it so much more real. Don't ever play hide and go seek outside at night. By Reddit user Shishubaki7. This happened to me so long ago, and I've been wanting to post this for a while. I just never found the words for what I saw before now. I was about 8 or 9 years old at the time, maybe younger. I was partially living with an older lady and her teenage kids in a big city suburb. I was originally from the next town over, so it wasn't that far from my parents. The lady's house was basically the it place for parents to dump their kids for prolonged amounts of time, so there were a bunch of kids there at all times. I'm not exactly sure when my brothers and I started being babysat by this lady. It just kind of sort of started. I don't think she was actually a nanny or even a certified child care provider. She was just the lady whom you could leave your kids with. My father and mother had divorced a few years before, and my mom had just remarried. She was living with my oldest brother and my stepfather, who was an ass. And let's just say that marriage didn't last too long. So that left me and my 2 younger brothers. I'll call them A and B, with our father. Anyway, my complicated home life aside, the point is, my father would often leave us with this lady. She was sweet, but her kids were, let's just say, they had their unkind moments, but for the most part, they were good kids. Before I get to the actual event, let me share some info on the lady's kids. The eldest of the lady's 3 children was a girl. I'll just call her number 1. She was sort of aloof with us since she was a senior in high school when we were all kids. She was rarely at her house, and when she was always in her room. The second oldest boy, number 2, was cool and calm. He would sometimes be left with us kids, which we all loved, when his mother went out shopping or the like. I think he was a junior, but I never really did ask. I just knew he had a lot of schoolwork to do, and he came home late after school. The last boy, number 3, was a sophomore, but he acted like a kid. He would often play with us, hold competitions. Sometimes he would walk us to the Boys and Girls Club behind his house, and we'd be there for hours. He was a jokester as well, turning off lights and locking doors just to scare us kids. He'd dare us to do stupid things, and we'd do them just because he dared us to. Like, once he dared me to run across the field behind his house barefoot, in the snow, at night. But hey, at least I can say that I did it now. This leads me to the event. One night, 3 had asked me and my brothers if we wanted to play hide and go seek. Naturally, we said yes. He had asked us 3 because we were the only children awake at the time, but I thought it was because I was the best hider. I had already a good hiding place in the basement of the house where I was sure no one would find me, but he surprised me by announcing that this particular round of hide and go seek would be played outside. He snickered as I so readily pointed out that it was going to be nighttime and it was April, so it was cold. He just told me that I would be fine and just to wear a sweater, and I obliged with his crazy game. Of course, in hindsight, I should have said no, but it's more than 13 years too late to start regretting it. Anyway, I ran down the streets of the suburb and found a quiet place near the playground to hide. It wasn't too cold, but I could still see my breath. Alone, I looked around the playground. Normally, it was a fun, happy place to play with friends, but at night, it just felt creeped out. I felt something behind me and rubbed the back of my neck. Thinking it was bugs, I shivered. I was found within a matter of minutes and followed number 3 to find my brothers and number 2, who suddenly joined the reckless game. B, my youngest brother, was hiding at an apartment building 6 or 8 blocks away from the house. I remember walking up to the apartment, staring at its orange lights, and wondered how my brother, who was like 5 or 6, got this far out without crying for mommy. A, who was around 7 or so, and 2 were closer to the house, and 3 found them after an hour of looking. We went back to the house, and I remember looking at the clock strike 11 p.m. I was flabbergasted at how late it was and began to complain to 3, who just shrugged it off. I enjoyed the game, but I wasn't cool with making my younger brothers walk around at nighttime alone. Number 3 didn't care for my ramblings and shoved me and A out of the door, locking it behind us. A frowned and looked at me angrily because he had been kicked out for no reason except that he was between me and the front door. I just instructed A to bang on the door until 3 gave up and opened it. We banged and banged until I felt something behind me, like I did at the playground. Then I felt a chill. Not just the normal chill you feel on an April night, but a sort of otherworldly chill. A felt it too because he looked at me and frowned deeper. I rubbed my arms in an attempt at getting warmer, but to no avail. The chill pierced through me, leaving me in wonder. Had it been this cold all night? Would it snow maybe? Still lost in thought, I looked towards the empty street. I scanned up and down the road, seeing no parked cars or anything. Thinking it a bit odd that none of the driveways had cars, I turned to A and pointed it out. We looked to the street again, and that's when I saw it. To this day, my brother A and I have the exact same description of what we saw. We often bring it up to each other just to remind ourselves that it happened, that it was real. There, at the place where the sidewalk and the walkway of the house met, was a man. It was dark, so we couldn't see the facial features of the man, but we did see him wearing a long coat, like a trench coat, and a hat, similar to a fedora. He was standing shock still, and the area around him was shadowy, like it was hazy with black smoke. I turned to A and said, "He wasn't there before, I swear." We then knew that it couldn't be human. The man, after several long, agonizing minutes of silence, began walking towards the house slowly, towards us. We screamed our little lungs out and turned to the door, and we began banging frantically. "Let us in, let us in." Slowly the man approached. I have never been more scared in my life. If I hadn't insisted on emptying my bowels before the hide-and-go-seek game, I honestly would have released them then. A was crying and I was screaming, banging, terrified, all whilst the man came closer. Eventually, thank God, 3 opened the door and A and I spilled inside. I shut the door with such force, I almost broke something. Locking it, I turned to 3 and B and told them what had happened. 3, not believing me, opened the door and peered out into the street. He said that there was nobody out there and that we just wanted to get him in trouble. I looked and saw he was right. There was no one. In fact, there were even cars on the street, something that wasn't there before. I basically said no way, I saw it, A saw it. And I kept insisting that I was telling the truth, but 3 rolled his eyes in disbelief. 2 led me and my brothers upstairs to bed, thinking that it was the tiredness that made me this way. I gave up and went to bed, but I never forgot what happened to me. Will it happen again? What was it exactly that I saw? Maybe the more appropriate question is, who exactly did I see? I pray I'll never find out. I would like to thank you all for listening to my narrations. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, and if you would like to hear more narrations in the future, remember to subscribe and click the bell in order to be notified of the next time I upload. I really enjoy making these videos, and I'm learning as I go, so they may be a bit rough around the edges right now, but they will only get better. If you have any suggestions on how I can make these videos better, or any stories you would like to hear me narrate in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below.